Hi, everybody. I'm a game designer, and I want to talk about game design and storytelling. I'm going to talk about a journalistic game, which is interesting, following Chris. And this is a game that I worked on very recently. That's the last thing that I've done, which is called The Waiting Game. And it was done with ProPublica, which is an investigative journalism organization in the US, and a local public radio station named WNYC. And I created this game with a journalist named CC Wei, who does a lot of interactive journalism at ProPublica. The core idea behind this game was that it was tied to immigration reporting, and particularly reporting around asylum seeking in the United States, so people fleeing countries under duress and what their experiences were. So the way the game works is that you play through the life of an anonymized person seeking asylum in the United States. You begin with the decision that they made to seek asylum in the United States from wherever they were, and it ends with the resolution of their story. And basically, you play by moving through each day of their life. You read a little bit about what happened to them, you see an illustration of their life, and then you click to keep going or to give up. And so you go day after day after day like that. If at any point you give up, we tell you how long you made it, and then we give you the ability to fast forward through the story or to view reporting that ProPublica and WNYC did on this topic, and that reporting you can find on the page about the asylum process in the US and how it works and how it doesn't work and what you see as you go through it. Now, the thing to me that's interesting about this is a news game, like quite directly, but it's also a story. And so what interests me about this is, where is the story in this game? Like, what in this game is the story? And what I would say is, the story is everywhere. Every piece of this is the story. Now, some of this is obvious, right? There's actual straight-up journalism here. This is like an article down here. So that we recognize. We know that that's a story. There's writing all over the thing. This writing was done a lot by me, a lot by Cece, a lot by a writer named Lindsay Palmer. And it was designed to kind of create the conditions that people lived in a procedural way. And it was vetted by editors at ProPublica. So like, that's story that we recognize. There are illustrations which were done by Sarah Santini that show you the setting that you're in. Again, that's story we recognize. But I said everywhere. And so everywhere includes the interactivity, right? And this is the entirety of the interactivity. Just go or give up. And what I want to suggest to you is that is as much a part of the storytelling of this work, right? These two buttons, as everything else I just showed you. All the writing, all the illustration, all the journalism are these two buttons. And to do that, I want to discuss how games tell stories. Like, what is the technique by which interactivity tells stories? To do that, I want to look at other examples of my work and other people's work, and I want to introduce you to a theory that is basically the center of game design theory in the world. But let's talk about another game first, so I can give you an example of this. And just for the sake of it, we're going to move out of the digital space, and we're going to move into the real world space with a game I created a few years ago called Kill Him and You Will Be Famous. So Kill Him and You Will Be Famous is for a festival that I co-run called Come Out and Play. It's run for 14 years, and it's a festival in which we play games in public. We go out into streets and public spaces and we play games, and we often do games that involve very large numbers of people together. And so one year it was my turn to do the big game, and I wanted to do something different than other people did. I didn't want to do big teams. I didn't want to do every person for themselves. I wanted to do a different kind of mechanic. So the idea I came up with was one versus many. Right? What's a game where one person would take on a large number of people? And so I started thinking narratively about things that were about that, and I came up with kung fu movies. Because how many people watch kung fu movies in the audience? Yeah. I can't see you very well with the lights, but yeah, a good number of people. So this scene, which is a Bruce Lee scene where he takes on a dojo full of thugs, is in almost every kung fu movie. Right? This is the master takes on 12 thugs scene of a kung fu movie. And you can find this in any movie you want. Like, go look them up. And everything from Old Boy to A Drunken Master. It's like the same scene. And so I watched a bunch of these scenes, and I found that there were characteristics of them that were always true. Attackers always attack one at a time. The master can beat any one attacker. The master is much better than any one attacker. It's the numbers that take the master down. The master always blocks or dodges first. It's not like the attackers run up and the master goes pop, pop, pop. That's not interesting, right? What happens is the attacker comes up and the master goes block, 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 dodge, block, block, punch. And then another attacker comes out. The attackers go down fast. They don't stand up very well, but they also come quickly. So you're constantly fighting them, and everybody uses Kung Fu. So it's all strikes and blocks. And so I wanted to design a game that would do this. And I happened to be in China. I was doing consulting in China at the time. And so when the office day ended, I just talked to all the Chinese game developers, and I was like, do you want to help me prototype a Kung Fu game? And they were like, yes. So we prototyped it together, and I tried a bunch of things, because I wanted to get this feel of martial arts, but martial arts are obviously dangerous. It's a discipline designed to hurt people, and I didn't want to hurt players, so I tried to figure out how to make a design that would work. And so we tested a bunch of things, like tagging each other, or you know, tapping each other, or moving around each other, and then I realized like I always carry a backpack everywhere I go, so I emptied it out, and I took a couple pieces of paper, and I crumpled them into balls, and I said, let me try to get a ball into your backpack. Now, at this point, it's helpful to show this thing, so I would like to get a volunteer from the audience to help me demonstrate this. I'm going to warn you, this is an athletic thing to do. Yes. Round of applause. Come see him. Nicholas? Okay, no, great. Both of us. All right. You are the master. I am the attacker. I want you to imagine there's a bolsa here. I am going to try to get one of these balls into that backpack. You can only block or dodge. Come on, forward. ¿Listos? Vamos. Gracias. All right. Did you see that? Now, what's interesting about this is that like we get this kind of feel of martial arts, right? Like he's blocking. I'm like striking, but I'm not hitting his head because I don't want to. Like there's no reason for me to. I want to get a ball in his backpack. His head is in the way. Right? And so that's the game that I designed. Sorry, that's a very athletic thing. So apologies. So this is how we prototyped it. That's me. This is Greg Trefry, who co-founded Come Out and Play. This was what the backpack originally looked like. It was a trash can on string. And this is what the game looked like in its final form. So we dolled up the trash bag with a wicker thing. And we got these tennis balls made out of foam, and it looked like this. And probably hundreds of people have played it at this point. I've shown it at a bunch of different festivals. Now, that thing that I did, right, I take the design of an idea, like a narrative idea, and then I try to figure out how to recreate that through rules. That is how games create stories. And that technique is an old technique that comes out of the work of a few designers that demonstrate that the process of play makes interactivity into storytelling. That what interactivity does is it makes me play a certain way, and by playing that way, I feel like I'm in a story. I feel like a martial artist. You feel like a master. And that's how storytelling works with interactivity. Now, this design approach comes from an article that was written by a bunch of famous game designers. Robin Hunicke, who worked on Journey, Mark LeBlanc, who worked on Thief, Robert Zubek, who worked on Cityville. And the name of the article is A Formal Approach to Game Design and Game Research. And in this article, they argue about how games can create basically aesthetic themes and feelings through play. This is based fundamentally on this acronym MDA, which stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, Aesthetics. I'm going to walk you through that quickly. All right, mechanics are at the base of what games are. Like at the very beginning of this conference, Damien talked about not having rules, right, for how things work. And that speaks to my heart because games are all about rules. Like foundationally, what we do in games is we lay out the things you can and can't do. And if we look at kind of games that exist, we can see them. We can look at the field in football and like the boundaries of a field in football. That's a rule. We can look at the types of pieces that exist in Tetris. That's a rule, right? That's like a piece you get when you start. We can look at the champions in Leagues of Legends, right? Where the champions are things the designers made that you get to play with. These are the pieces of games. And those pieces can only be used certain ways. But when you use them pursuing a goal, trying to get the ball into the net, trying to clear the field, trying to beat the other team, you play. These parameters create conditions under which certain actions become possible and other actions are impossible. And so you emerge with behavior because of the rules. The rules construct behavior for you that you participate in. I can't hold the ball in football, so I have to kick it. And then kicking it leads me to play a completely different game. So I get formations in football that are the result of the fact that I have to stay within bounds and I have to kick the ball, and I can only kick the ball certain ways. I get Tetris moments in Tetris where I can clear 4 rows at a time. Nothing in the game tells me to do that. I realize that possibility from the pieces. I can jungle in League of Legends. And I can tailor characters to jungle better. Nothing in the rules of League of Legends tells me to do that. I figure it out by looking at the champions and looking at the board and looking at the powers. It emerges. Does that make sense? But if I do something, I feel the results of doing it. My body changes, my mind changes, and I have feelings that result from that interactivity. And that can reflect themes and tones and stories. And that is how interactivity becomes aesthetic. So I get feelings of exultation and triumph from football. Feelings of grace, feelings of athleticism. I get hyper-focused, zoned out concentration in Tetris. I get collaboration and optimized efficiency in League of Legends. These emotions are not accidents. They are built into the mechanics of the system. And it is by using those mechanics that we get the play that makes this possible. So rules create behaviors which create emotions. This is the art of game design in its simplest form. Now, it's a little bit misleading to look at it this way because as I demonstrated to you, we generally start backwards. We begin by thinking about the emotion, which leads us to the behavior we want, which leads us to try to think of the rules that will create that behavior so that you'll behave that way, so you'll feel that way. And that's the loop that design goes through. Okay, so how does this work in the waiting game, right? Like, that's where I started, right? So how did I design this piece? Well, the aesthetic I started with had to do with US politics. I came up with this idea just around the time of the most recent presidential election. And I was watching a lot of media and reading a lot of news about the way the US was talking about immigration and how safe immigrants were to the country, that they could be terrorists. And I knew this was ridiculous because I knew that to be an immigrant coming into the United States takes literal years, like 3 to 7 years. And asylum seekers in particular take like 5 years to get into the country. The idea that someone could not be vetted enough in that time was insane to me. And I started to think that maybe the reason why people felt these things was because they couldn't conceptualize the time. Like maybe they just can't comprehend what 5 years is. So I found this data visualization online. I'd show it to you, but I had to switch computers, so I'm just going to describe it. It's called If the Moon Were Only 1 Pixel. And it's basically, it calls itself a tediously accurate scale model of the solar system. So basically the way it works is that Josh Worth creates a map of the solar system where the moon is 1 pixel big. And the way you interact with it is you just scroll across the solar system. So you start at the sun and you swipe a few times, you know, about as many as you'd think, like 3 times. And then you see Mercury, and then you swipe 3 times, and then you see Venus, and you swipe 2 or 3 times, and then you see Earth, and then you see the moon, which is really small because it's 1 pixel. And then you swipe a couple more times, and you see Mars. And the next planet is Jupiter. And if you don't know anything about astrology, which I didn't, you feel like, oh, well, you swipe a couple more times and then you see Jupiter. But that's not how the solar system works. And if you know astronomy, you know that Jupiter is as far away as 3 times the size of everything you just did. So you get to where Jupiter is, and you swipe, and I counted up to a point, I don't know, like 100 times. And you still don't see Jupiter. Now, I have no idea how far Jupiter is from Mars or how big the solar system is. But I know that picture I saw in school of the concentric circles is bullshit. Because what this piece gave to me was an embodiment of space. I suddenly had a way to conceive of space because I saw it as a ton of swipes. So how far away is Mars from Jupiter? Tons more swipes than Mars is from Earth. And while that's not like factually true in a way I could go like pass a test with, that is an accurate understanding of it. It is much, much further. And I thought, what would an embodiment of time look like? Could I give someone a sense of time that was like the sense I had of space? So here's how I did it. You play through every day of an asylum seeker's life from the moment they decide to seek asylum in the United States. That process, for the shortest story in our experience, takes 2.5 years. 2.5 years, if you go every day, is 800 days. So that means it's 800 clicks away. And every day, you have to hit keep going. This text is not that interesting. Because every day of your life is not that interesting. Especially if you're hiding because you don't want to get caught, either in your country or you're in detention somewhere. So we expected, and it turned out to be true, that most people quit. But when you quit, we capture you. And we tell you exactly how many days you lasted and exactly how many days it took that person to last. And we ask you to imagine for a second that that thing that you did that took you 15 seconds actually took someone 24 hours. And they lasted, in this case, 40 times longer than you did. And if you absorb that from this screen and from the buttons you clicked over and over again, you have a sense of how long it must have taken a human being to go through this process. A process, I will remind you, you do not know ends in success. The aesthetic was an embodiment of time. The dynamic was getting you to enact every day. And the tediousness of enacting every day would cause you to quit. The mechanic is 2 buttons. Does that make sense? Mechanic to aesthetic, art, interactivity is storytelling. Now, this is like one way to do this, so I'm going to give some other examples of like other ways this is done, because trying to talk about games in a half an hour is nuts. So I want to kind of give you a few more examples to think about that are based on the same kind of technique but take different forms. So what do other models of storytelling in games look like? Well, there are obviously these sort of AAA games that are very cinematic and very powerful. At their heart, they do very similar things. So in Naughty Dog's The Last of Us, you play a father trying to rescue a young girl from a post-apocalyptic disaster area. But your gameplay is about sneaking around. The enemies are too powerful for you to destroy. You always have limited ammunition. You always have limited supplies. So you can't possibly defeat the infection. All you can do is just try to survive and keep your surrogate daughter alive. The life of this is as much in those moments when you are sneaking past a listening enemy as it is in the graphics you see here. You might just allow people to inhabit a world where nothing else really happens and just tell them a story in that world. So games like Firewatch, What Remains of Edith Finch, Gone Home, like allow you to explore spaces that have stories attached to them, and you chart your own path through them. But you don't do much of anything else. You just watch those stories unfold, and that exploration gives you the ability to discover the story for yourself. We can use mechanics to reflect in simple ways on the experiences that we don't have. So in Anna Anthropy's Dysphoria, she reflects on her gender reassignment treatments by showing you what the experience was like, for example, to use a bathroom where society does not think you belong. What's fascinating about this moment in this game is that this is not a judged activity. There is no score. You either make it to the toilet and then the level ends, or a door opens on you and the level ends. The point is not to judge you. The point is to give you the experience of dodging other people. This is an amazing little piece of work, by the way. We can build giant narrative environments and then just let you do whatever you want in them. Right? This is the innovations that Bethesda brought to open world games. And so games like Fallout, in which populations inhabit post-nuclear Washington, D.C. And you simply encounter them. And when you encounter them, you have relationships that form that then shape the direction of the story. So while you don't control what the content is in that world, you control the reaction that everything has to you. And if you decide to back one force, the world conforms to tell a story about your heroism to that side and your villainy to everyone else. But it doesn't judge your choice. So your ethics are what you bring to it. And you can do that in the real world by creating spaces that people can explore at their own pace and telling stories that run through them. Immersive theater and the connections between immersive theater and games and VR cannot be overstated. But the design techniques are similar. I put story content in the world that you can interact with. You don't control the story. You choose where you go. And then your interactivity determines this story, because maybe you simply follow Lady Macbeth the whole time. And that is a different story than someone that follows Banquo. Or we can just boil it down to the simple choices I showed you in the waiting game. You know, looking at a game like Papers, Please by Lucas Pope. A game, again, about immigration, but this time about being a border guard making decisions about who comes and goes. A game in which people will come to you with wrong information. They are fleeing something. Their paperwork was screwed up. They desperately need to get through. You have one choice in this game. You either approve or deny someone coming in. And the game's mechanic tells you that you can screw up 2 times before we start taking money away from you. And that money goes to feed your family. So if you start losing money, your family starts to get sick. But 2 times, you can get this wrong. So if someone comes to you with bad paperwork, but they're fleeing a pimp across the border, is that person worth one of those mistakes? If you know you might make a mistake anyway. Or is the person who's registered as male but appears female worth a mistake? Or is the revolutionary who promises to free the country worth a mistake? And then when you have two mistakes, are any of those people worth food for your family? And so this game about border control becomes a game about ethics. But those ethics live in two rules. A binary choice of accept or reject, and a limit to how many times you can get that choice wrong. In all of these cases, I think we see a kind of interactivity at work that tells a story. It speaks to an aesthetic. But it does it not by showing me content or playing audio for me or having me read something, although all of those are powerful and all of those work to tell stories. These experiences do it also by putting you in a position to make decisions and having the way you make decisions lead you to feel a certain way that ties to the narrative. And hopefully by showing a range of choices, I've demonstrated the range of aesthetic possibilities that come out of that kind of thinking. Up to and including, and this is like the weirdest one, so I save it for last. This is a game called The Grizzled. It was made in France. And it effectively is a game commemorating the grandparents of the designers who fought in the wars. And the game basically has you play a platoon of soldiers defending France from the oncoming German armies. And in this game, you are judged by your ability to be a brother to the soldiers around you. The only violence that's articulated is the stress that you are under in the bunker in which you reside. And so a game can kind of reach this point where it can be a meditation on war and loss and the stress of a soldier's life. And I think that that's kind of amazing. And we can do that with nothing more than a few cards and a set of rules. So, my point here is, if you're thinking about interactivity, games is a good way to think about it because that's all games are, is interactivity. But if you think about interactivity in your work, if you want your work to be interactive, just know that the work itself is an aesthetic statement at the level of the interactivity. Beyond the words, beyond the audio, beyond the visuals. The interactivity itself is telling the story. So any interactive experience a piece contains has to be thought of as part of the narrative of that piece. But if you do that right, like if you pay attention to it, and you think about the MDA that's at work in the interactivity you've designed, you can use the aesthetics of play to make that interactivity part of your story. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Nick.